Buffy the Vampire Slayer, released in 2000 for the Game Boy Color, and unfortunately, based upon the Sarah Michelle Gellar TV show and not the 1992 movie, is surprisingly a fun little Game Boy game. You play as the titled Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as she travels through Sunnydale and fights vampires, accompanied by weird MS Paint style cutscenes. What is unique about this game, unlike in most other games where vampires are enemies, you must kneel down and stake a vampire to actually defeat it. Buffy has 2 meters, a stamina and a health meter. Her stamina goes down from hand-to-hand combat with vampires, and once it's empty, a vampire can drain her blood, depleting the health. At your disposal, you have punches, kicks, a roll, and a suplex move that is kinda hard to pull off. You can find cans of soda for a power kick or punch. You can fight vampires until their strength empties, but unless you stake them, they will regain it. But you can also stake vampires at any time they are on the ground, no matter their strength level. So most of the time, a low kick followed by a roll to stake them is the fastest way to take the undead down. Staking can be a bit cumbersome though. Because of the hit detection, you have to be at the exact spot to be able to stake them. If you're just a little bit off, you can't perform the move. This hit detection problem also happens in combat sometimes. If you're standing on top of each other, another issue is the kind of awkward jumping. Due to the limited buttons on the Game Boy, jump is up. That in and of itself isn't an issue, but the jump is short. But to jump any distance, you first have to squat before jumping, making it slightly weird to pull off. Squatting before jumping, I wonder if Buffy is the descendant of Eric from Castlevania Bloodlines. The levels are definitely interesting, starting at a spooky cemetery and traveling to such locations as the sewers and alleyways. The enemies are at least varied, although only one type appears in each level, ranging from standard undead vampires, some biker-looking vampires that look like they came from dusk till dawn, to sewer-dwelling nasty monsters that explode its body parts when staked. Scattered throughout the levels are items that can be thrown or kicked at the enemies to knock them down, but all in all, it's just easier to trip them or suplex them if you can pull it off and stake them. I only played to the zoo level, but it was actually fun enough to pick back up at some point to see what kind of enemies fill the later levels. For the atmosphere, I'll give it a 2. It's generally spooky with cemeteries and sewers, but the between-level, cartoony cutscenes and certain level locations keep it from being fully immersed in spooky atmosphere. For the gameplay, I'll give it a 2.5. It's a pretty fun beat-em-up, and the added faithfulness to the vampire mythology by having to actually stake them makes up for the bad hit detection and awkward controls. Definitely one of the better horror-adjacent games officially released for the Game Boy Color. But wait, I also played, or well, tried to play, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer Game Boy Advance game. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Wrath of the Darkhul King was released in 2003. Right away, it starts by establishing the lore of the main bad guy, and then it cuts to low pixel stills from the TV show. I take back what I said about the weird MS Paint style cutscenes from the last. At least someone had to draw those. This game is pretty much a sequel to the Game Boy Color game, a beat-em-up where you fight vampires and stake them to kill them, except this game adds other items and the stake isn't a default weapon. In fact, you have a limited supply of stakes and you have to collect them from smashing boxes. You then have to press select to equip it, but if you don't switch back to the fist, you might accidentally just use up all the stakes. The vampires, well, at least in this first level, aren't very scary. They look like they're wearing bowling shirts. The awkward jumping is even worse in this game, having to press the R button to jump. And to jump forward, you have to dash first by double tapping the directional pad, which can be kind of hard to pull off sometimes. A 3-button combo just to jump seems crazy to me. They really should have made either A or B the jump button and the R button an attack button, because unlike the first, where there wasn't much jumping, there's all kinds of jumping and rope climbing in this one. So much so, I kept dying in the intro level because of the weird jump, so much to the point I was over the game by the time I'd gotten to the first real level. The game might actually get better, but honestly, I wouldn't know. But I am going to go ahead and give it a judgment based on what I saw. For the atmosphere, I'm giving it a 1. Maybe it could get better and get a 1.5, but the vampires really didn't look interesting, and the generic city street you start on wasn't spooky in the least. Gameplay, it also gets a 1. The jumping with the R button really makes it kind of difficult to execute the platforming required in just the intro. The weapons are kind of interesting, but the simple stake weapon of the Game Boy Color is more satisfying. I definitely recommend the Game Boy Color over the Game Boy Advance version for a fun vampire slaying time.